Hey, it's Mazzy. Welcome back. Bob Dylan's 1970s tour, 4 tours in the 1970s, 4 major tours. But I'm concentrating on the much aligned 1978 World Tour and Budokan. I'll talk about this in the second half of this video, the various releases and the limited 8 LP edition that you can only get in Japan, very limited edition. But I want to talk about Dylan's 1970 tours because this was a time where he made these great and very different 4 tours in the 1970s. Now, of course, it all began in 1971, which wasn't a tour, but Bob Dylan did appear at the Concert for Bangladesh. 2 shows, an afternoon show and an evening show. And even the other performers weren't sure if Dylan was going to show up until he actually physically showed up during the first set, the afternoon tour. That was his first live show since 1966. So a 5-year span of no Dylan. In those days, 5 years was like eons without Dylan performing. Of course, aside from Johnny Cash show and a few other, maybe that's it. I'm not quite sure. But I want to talk about, I'm going to give you a little background before we get into Budokan and before we get into 1978 tours and my take on it. Of course, in 1974, the big one of the 70s really was the 1974 tour with the band. Bill Graham produced all the shows around the country. This is the album that came out. This is that period of time where Dylan had left Columbia, signed with Asylum, put out Planet Waves, and then toured in 1974. And again, this is from the Oakland tour with the band backing him up. This was a raucous tour. Obviously, he did an acoustic set again, and he did this great set with the band. And, you go your way, I'll go mine. He was just powerful and explosive in this. And this was my first time seeing Bob Dylan in Oakland. There'll be a shot right here that I took, a couple of shots here. I took at the Oakland Coliseum. I think I saw... I thought I saw 2 shows, but I'm misremembering that maybe. Maybe I only did 1, but I could have sworn I went to 2 shows at the Oakland Coliseum. A fantastic tour. The soundtrack or the live record that came out of it was amazing. Originally on Asylum Records, and then it eventually returned. This is my Asylum original copy. Everything now reverted to Columbia Records. Then in 1976, 2 years later, again, totally different. He does the Hard Rain tour. And when this album came out, I was perplexed. I actually saw one show in Austin, and it was literally a circus. And of course, the film Ronaldo and Claire had come out after that. And 4 hours, I remember sitting at the Castro Theater in San Francisco, 4+ hours of that. Excruciating. This record, I didn't really latch onto till decades later. This is basically Dylan's punk record. 1976, the perfect time. He gets on the road, he goes on with Scarlett Rivera, with Emmylou Harris, with members of what would become the Alpha Band, T-Bone Burnett, Stephen Souls, David Mansfield, and Roger McGuinn, and countless others, folkies and vagabonds. Joan Baez shows up and plays on it. There's been a expanded edition of the bootleg series from this since, but I absolutely love this album. This is my white label promo, and now, to me, this is one of my favorite live Dylan albums, but it's a powerful album. It's the closest Dylan had to a punk album. Also in 1976, the end of that year, Thanksgiving, he shows up and plays The Last Waltz. I did see this show too, Thanksgiving at Winterland. For $25 included a turkey dinner. I've talked about this show before. I don't have to go into the details now. Watch the Martin Scorsese film on this concert film, one of the best concert films ever made, The Last Waltz. And then, of course, another misunderstood tour at the time, and this is in 1979 to 81, but it started in 1979. I saw 3 of the shows, the opening shows at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco. I believe that kicked off this tour. And the beginning of that tour Again, people were very perplexed. This is basically his Jesus tour, his Christian tour. He had put out Slow Train, and I remember that first show, that opening night, being at that show. Some people after a while booing and walking out because he didn't do any of his old songs, none of his hits, none of his secular work, all songs from Slow Train and what would become the next couple of albums he had. Now, this has been revisited, and obviously I didn't see later in the tour. I did see 3 nights, including one where Mike Bloomfield shows up and plays. I loved it, but I thought it was hysterical, and people were pissed off. Of course, it circulated after the first night that Dylan's not doing any of his hits, and it sold out fast, another Bill Graham-produced show, not the whole tour, but this showed up in Trouble No More. This is the expanded multi-disc, came out obviously CDs and vinyl of that whole and tour. And this kicks ass. I mean, he's got gospel singers. You really hear it getting better as the tour progresses. So I did see 3 of those shows. I was on my first trip to Europe, and I was in Amsterdam. I would see posters throughout Europe. I think I saw in Rome a poster on a wall that said Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, Bob Marley. They weren't together, but it was some tours coming to Rome, some shows coming to Rome. And I just, I was really interested in music, and I hadn't really seen any big shows or much live music while I was in Europe that particular trip. But I was in Amsterdam at a hostel, staying at a hostel, and I saw a flyer, and I went and bought a ticket to Rotterdam to see Dylan. And I believe it was Clapton opened up, or Clapton was on the set. I forgot who else now. And Dylan comes out with this big band. This is the 1978 World Tour of Bob Dylan. This is a tour that people like to dump on. People hated it when it finally appeared on vinyl at the time in 1979. And people just thought it was his Vegas act, his Vegas tour. Bob Dylan started in Japan, started in Budokan, played several shows, went on, toured around Japan, came back to Budokan and played a couple shows in the end of February and early March of 1978. But before that, let's get into Budokan, the venue itself. A lot of people my generation heard about Budokan because of this. This is a bootleg. This is the Beatles in Japan, Beatles at Budokan. The bootleg is called 5 Nights in a Judah Arena. There's a video, beautiful footage shot on videotape actually, of the Beatles playing there in 1966 on stage in Japan on their final tour, what became their final tour. And this is our introduction to Budokan. It had been a judo arena, big sports arena, not a venue. And I think might have been the Beatles that were the first rock band to play. And of course, some 12 years later, not only did Dylan perform there, but what became famous and a huge record in 1978 was Cheap Trick at Budokan too. Another, wonderful act that really pushed them and became their biggest hit at the day. Cheap Tricks at Budokan. But of course, we're going to hear about Bob Dylan. There is a 2 LP set that's coming out everywhere that are different tracks than the 1979 release. They're the best of the 2 nights, February 28th, 78 and March 1st, 1978. Those are the 2 nights that are released on this expanded set. The CD box has all the tracks from those 2 nights. And then there is this limited edition, Japan only set that is 8 LPs vinyl with a beautiful slip obi that has the track listing here. And this actually is like a Vegas showcase. It's his probably most produced live tour. And in 1978, that was like the antithesis, the opposite of what was happening musically, obviously with the punk scene and disco. And all of a sudden, Dylan comes out dressed in white with a real slick audience doing his best Neil Diamond and Elvis Presley type presentation. And it turned off a lot of critics, but I love this. I loved it since it came out, but I think we're reevaluating it now. So first, let me talk about the records themselves. There's 8 LPs, 140 gram. We don't need 180 gram. 140 gram, all flat, extremely quiet, beautiful pressings. I'll go through the package in a minute. I would say there's a more warmth to the new set of warmth. I think the highs are slightly, ever so slightly clipped from the 1979 release here, but not as much to notice it. And if you don't A/B them, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. And probably most people who have this record don't listen to it much anyway, so I don't know if that matters. Again, this is only available from Japan. Let's go through some of it. Now, first of all, it opens up with A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, an instrumental version, heavy on saxophone. And this is where it gets dicey for some listeners, because that opening track is an instrumental, and it's exactly what you would expect and see and hear at a Las Vegas review, with the orchestra, the band playing an instrumental version of a hit, and then Elvis, Neil Diamond, Bob Dylan coming on stage, and then, of course, going into a version after that of Repossession Blues into Mr. Tambourine Man. And it's a really good version. It's a upbeat version. It's more of a slick version, if you will, but his arrangements are wonderful. His vocals are wonderful, and the musicians are wonderful. Again, as I said earlier, I think my only problem with this whole recording of this whole tour, slightly a little too much saxophone and a little not enough guitar work. Like, obviously, seeing the other tours of Bob Dylan, heavy guitar and Hard Rain, more of a punkish, intense guitar thing, and a million guitars flashing back and forth where it gets muddies a little bit. And then, of course, Robbie Robertson's great guitar playing in the 74 tour. That's my only thing. After a while, that could wear on you, especially over 2 full concerts. But I would say this is a lovely set. It's got a lovely, as you can see, very glossy cover. Bob Dylan. And each record has its own sleeve. And within that sleeve, there is a paper outer sleeve, beautifully designed, very, Japanese origami-like, cut in terms of angular. But inside is another polyline sleeve with the 140 gram beautiful custom label records. Again, quiet, pristine, flat, really well presented. There's this cool book, Japanese design, really cool book, that talks about the tour, talks about the negotiations with Columbia and Sony Japan and Columbia and Japan to get this recorded. Not sure if they were going to actually put out a live album or not. Then the decision originally to just release it in Japan, and of course later in the US. They talk about finding and really going through the tapes several years ago, and then transferring them digitally. Beautiful photographs by Joel Bernstein and Hirosuke Katsuyama. Here are the tape boxes, so you get a really good sense of all the recording on this. You see all the various labels of related to this release, and of course the set list. What a lovely, lovely design. Wonderful Japanese design. In addition, there's a separate sleeve that has memorabilia from the complete Budokan 1978 tour. In this, original flyers, discography, tour booklet, in Japanese, sometimes seeing Bob Dylan can be a crapshoot, especially today. I've seen Dylan 3 times in the last 15 years, I think. 2 of the times I thought were terrible. One time he was absolutely magnificent. He rearranges songs. These days, a lot of times the songs are unrecognizable until you hear the lyrics. He changes up melodies, he changes up arrangements. But going back to 1970s and all these 4 tours, and even going back to the concert for Bangladesh and the last Waltz, every tour he changed the arrangements of his songs, the songs that he covered again. But I am a big fan of this, and of course, this is an expanded set that not everyone needs. I would say if you're a Dylan completist and a vinyl person, this is a no-brainer. It's not cheap, but I would go for it. But you can get the same material pretty much in the CD package for a lot less. So if you're into compact disc and you don't have a problem, and I'm sure it's just as fine as much as you may listen to this. This is a magnificent box set. You know, it is literally the Vegas style of Bob Dylan with this huge band, background vocalists, 13, 14, whatever musicians on stage at once. And I still vividly remember that show. It was so exciting to see it at a large outdoor stadium in Rotterdam. And of course, the indoor, even though the Open Coliseum is not a small club or small venue, I had really good close-up seats, and I remember seeing it in 1970, and I just loved it. I mean, to me, seeing Bob Dylan is a magical experience if you're in the mood and if you're really into Bob Dylan. So thanks for watching. Bob Dylan, The Complete Budokan 1978. This is the vinyl only 8 LP Japanese edition. And thanks for watching, and Mazzy loves you. Take care.